The kind of man who thinks his worth is determined by his title tends to become tragically overinvested in his workplace. My husband, Trevor, a senior sales associate at a tech startup, who I will now call the tenant, was precisely this kind of man. He was constantly on his mobile, bragging about his potential to close deals, conveniently forgetting to mention that most of the furniture in our upscale Denver apartment, and indeed our entire, secure lifestyle, was financed by my truly, and intentionally, boring corporate role. In reality, my job involved managing 4 multi-use commercial properties. It was less flash, more steady passive income, the kind often overlooked by the aggressively ambitious. One of those properties was a stylish, remodeled office building valued at $800,000 on the up-and-coming side of the city. Trevor, who bragged daily about his startup's cutting-edge culture, rented the entire 3rd floor. He had no idea his wife was his landlord's silent equity partner. 10 years of marriage ended abruptly in our minimalist kitchen with all the emotional coldness of a bad business merger. He had barely waited for me to set down my third-party property management reports before announcing, "I'm taking the opportunity to find a relationship that gives me more energy. You're great, Chloe, but I need someone who doesn't complain and is more supportive of my grind, someone sweeter." The sweeter assistant, I soon deduced and confirmed with some quick digging and an inspection of mobile data logs, was Haley. A 26-year-old executive assistant at his firm, known for her performative social activism, relentless cheerleading of Trevor's CEO potential, and fervent veganism. The affair hadn't happened in a seedy hotel or a local motel, it happened where Trevor felt most secure, where he was the senior sales guy with all the answers, in my own building. The betrayal was not merely personal, it was spatial. It was an insult to my portfolio. Walking away crying was never an option. That would have validated his narrative and violated my operational mantra, never treat an asset with emotion. I left the marriage using my preferred tactical approach, administrative vengeance. My first call wasn't to a divorce lawyer, that would come later. It was to my long-suffering property manager, Ms. Klein. "Sandra," I said, as I packed a small overnight bag. "I need you to schedule a full property audit and compliance check for the 3rd floor, particularly concerning Annex 14B, sanitary standards and end-of-day access, taking effect immediately. Sign the notices under the ownership entity Roden Investments LLC. I will be joining you for the first day of inspection." Ms. Klein, who dealt with my mundane requests weekly, just adjusted her glasses. "3rd floor is Trevor's startup, right? Unusual, but done. I'll make sure the access codes are updated." 2 days later, I was on the 3rd floor of my building, the space where Trevor conducted his infidelity, wearing an unmemorable beige jacket and holding a clipboard. Trevor's presence was everything I expected, loud and dismissive. "Who are you?" he interrupted, cutting off Trevor's sales pitch to a client over the phone and looking directly at me. "I'm Chloe from Roden Investments, acting on behalf of the ownership," I said, meeting his eyes without a flicker of recognition. "We're conducting a routine inspection for compliance. Your company's lease allows for unscheduled quarterly reviews." Trevor was instantaneously annoyed at having his big shot presentation interrupted by low-level property management. "Look, we're cutting edge here. None of this antique building management stuff. My assistant, Haley, will take your questions. We have huge Q3 sales coming up." This was my initial assessment. I watched Haley, the sweet assistant, approach me, clipboard in hand. She looked down on me with the superior pity of youth for boring middle management. "Hi, Mr. Trevor is in a very critical meeting. Can you just make this brief? And by the way, the AC in the south wing often smells like burning rubber. You should really fix that, landlord lady." They genuinely thought I was a contractor. Over the next 4 hours, I conducted my audit. I discovered the nest right where I expected, the building's utility closet, which his company had illegally annexed and secured with a separate, unapproved lock, complete with a tiny bottle of cheap champagne. First breach of lease, unauthorized structural alteration, Annex 11A. I also discovered unauthorized late-night access logs from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. on numerous dates, coinciding perfectly with Trevor's supposed late nights closing pitches. Second breach, violation of silent hours. The legal and ethical lines blurred into a perfect weapon. This was no longer just about Trevor. His company was complicit, and his manager, Joe, had clearly been covering for him. They had weaponized my property against me. Now I would weaponize ownership against them. I left a stern, official landlord notice taped to Trevor's office door, citing several unspecified compliance issues, deliberately creating a sense of creeping dread without revealing the source. Then, sitting in my clean, anonymous car in the parking garage, which I also technically owned, I drove directly to a specialty butcher's shop. Operation Vengeance leveraged Haley's most deeply held principle, veganism. The lease agreement had a crucial clause: tenant must maintain sanitary and nuisance-free conditions across the property, including ductwork. I knew from my audit that Trevor's maintenance practices were shoddy. I placed the heavily packaged, slow-to-spoil but powerful-smelling beef liver deep inside a storage room cooling vent that connected directly to the HVAC system of their third-floor office, not near Trevor's office, but right over Haley's primary workstation. My lawyer, Helen Voss, a true aficionado of bureaucratic cruelty, loved it. "This is genius, Chloe. You're not vandalizing, you're managing an environmental nuisance in your own building." 3 days later was the climax, the dual downfall. The smell on the third floor was not merely unpleasant, it was a crisis. Trevor's office, usually a temple of ego, had devolved into a noxious, unhygienic den. Haley was having a full emotional meltdown. Ms. Klein and I walked onto the floor promptly at 10 a.m., armed with thick gloves and 2 maintenance workers. Trevor and Joe, his sales manager, were desperately attempting to pinpoint the source of the disinfectant failure. Haley, crying on the phone with what looked like her mother, was near hysterics. "It's the flesh. It's the constant, overwhelming smell of carcass," Haley screamed, her strict vegan sensibilities having completely abandoned her professionalism. "Ms. Klein," I said, my voice cutting through the panic like pure acid. "This is a gross, unsanitary violation of Annex 15B. It directly impacts structural integrity and other tenants. You need to identify the odor immediately and rectify the cost of repairs from the tenant's security deposit." Trevor was too busy breathing through a desk lamp filter to recognize the voice. "Who the hell are these people? Get them out of here, Joe. I'm calling the fire marshal. We're losing money." Joe, under immense financial pressure to not lose the property, was frantic. "You need to maintain the property. This is your company's fault." I pointed directly at the cooling vent right above Haley's workstation. "The odor is centralized right there. Is that vent part of their installation?" The investigation crew, operating under my direction, quickly found the source: the decaying meat. The silence that followed was broken by my final words. My clipboard dropped slightly, revealing my face and my simple, white leather landlord ID, Chloe R., proprietor. My voice lowered into the conversational snappiness I usually reserve for hostile refinancing negotiation. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Trevor. But the lease agreement is very clear about the endangerment to health clauses. You and your company have violated them repeatedly, both via unpermitted construction and unsanitary conditions. I am the owner of this building. And you have repeatedly broken my rules, right here, where you brought your affair." The humiliation was total on 2 fronts. Workplace humiliation. Manager Joe, realizing he would lose his premier apartment if he didn't comply with the owner, looked at Trevor with utter disgust. "You're fired, Trevor. Effective immediately. For vandalism, professional misconduct, and a catastrophic security breach. Get out of my building." A fair collapse. Haley, who worshipped him and his supposed power, stared at him. "You don't own the building? You were messing with the vents to annoy me?" It was all a lie. He cheated on a millionaire only to be living in the building she owned. He sputtered and cursed, but I, the owner, simply gestured to the maintenance crew. Clear the premises. Security will escort the now terminated tenant off the property. And Miss Klein, please prepare a notice on my behalf. Roden Investments will be denying the lease renewal for the entire third-floor tenant unless the company agrees to release and legally terminate Ms. Haley from her executive assistant role by the end of the week, effective immediately. Haley, in the process of blaming Trevor, realized she was next on the managerial chopping block, for the sake of the landlord's compliance rules. He had ruined not just his own job but his suite replacement's primary revenue stream. 2 days later, Trevor returned to my legally house, tearful, jobless, and completely out of options. I calmly met him in the dining room, reviewing my next investment property brief. "Do you understand what you did?" he screamed, begging. "I understand property law, Trevor," I replied, not looking up. "The cost of your affair was exactly 1 job loss and 1 angry landlord. I wasn't just working a boring job, Trevor. I was establishing a passive financial and legal perimeter around my life. You merely thought my stillness was weakness. You were wrong." I let him walk away penniless and jobless with all the calm of signing a final lease agreement before finding another, more financially sound renter. He had sought the temporary heat of a workplace romance inside the solid, permanent walls of my passive income security. When the passive asset chose to become active, his world crumbled effortlessly. Power, I learned, isn't about being loud in a sales meeting. It's about knowing you own the chair they're sitting in, the roof over their head, and the legal right to ask them to kindly vacate my premises.